this international conference organized by Center of Disability Services, Brawijaya University. Ladies and gentlemen, in this event, we also provide a sign language interpreter. You can access this by clicking the globe icon on the bottom of your screen. Ladies and gentlemen, on this occasion, I would like to inform you the agenda of this event. First, we will sing the Indonesian National Anthem. And after that, our next agenda is the opening remarks by Director of Brawijaya University. Followed that is the committee report, which will be delivered by Mrs. Alice Putri Lintang Sari, MLI. And after that, we will have the plenary session, which will be led by the moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, to begin with, we will sing the Indonesian National Anthem. Ladies and gentlemen, please wait for a minute for the host to start the Indonesian National Anthem. Ladies and gentlemen, now we are entering the next agenda is the opening remarks by Director of Brawijaya University. Please welcome Professor Widodo, SSI, MSI, PhD, Math Science. The time and screen are yours. Halo, selamat pagi, Profesor Widodo. Good morning, Professor Widodo. Good morning, Professor Widodo. Ladies and gentlemen, please kindly wait for a while Professor Widodo is trying to connect in our Zoom. Thank you. Halo, selamat pagi, Profesor Widodo. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize in advance since Professor Widodo is still trying to reconnect to our Zoom. So we will moving forward to our next agenda is the committee report, which will be delivered by Mrs. Alice Putri Lintangsari, MLI. Please welcome Mrs. Alice Putri Lintangsari, MLI. The time and screen are yours.
Good morning. Thank you, Bu Cindy. Good morning. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. The Honorable Rector of Universitas Brawijaya, Professor Widodo SSI, MSI PhD, the distinguished speakers, Professor Tiffany Wild, Architect Joseph Kwan, MH, Daniel Stubbs, Dr. Artemi, and also Bapak Fadilah Putra PhD. And all dear distinguished presenters and attendees. First of all, I would like to deliver the gratitude for this event, the first international conference on disability held by Center for Disabilities Services, Universitas Brawijaya. In this conference, there are 20 presenters around the world joining the conference with the various topics such as advocacy, education, well-being, and also universal design. The conference is also a token for 1 decade of inclusive education practices in Universitas Brawijaya, Indonesia. We do really hope that this conference provides an opportunity for us to learn to each other to support disability inclusion initiative in over the world. Thank you for all your participation in this conference and enjoy the conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Alice Putri Lintangsari, MLI, for delivering the committee report. And now, our next agenda will be the opening remarks by the Honorable Rector of Brawijaya University. Please welcome Professor Widodo, SSI, MSI, PhD, Math Science. The time and screen are yours. Good morning, Professor Widodo. Halo, selamat pagi, Profesor. Ladies and gentlemen, please kindly wait for Professor Widodo. We apologize in advance for the inconvenience. Ladies and gentlemen, I also want to remind you again, in this event, we also provide a sign language interpreter. You can access this by clicking the globe icon on the bottom of your screen. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize in advance since we are still trying to reach Professor Widodo at the moment. And please kindly watch our video started by Center of Disability Services. Ladies and gentlemen, while we're waiting for Professor Widodo to join us back in the Zoom meeting, we'll start by saying this. The theme of this conference is supporting the disability inclusion initiatives toward inclusive society. The conference highlights the initiatives in the terms of plans, best practice, evaluations, critics, and future direction of disability Indonesia around the world. We also invite the scholars, practitioners, scientists, policymakers, and other related parties to share their experience, knowledge, insight, and ideas to encourage the inclusion of disability in all sectors. Therefore, we serve the sub-themes of our conference in the following study areas. First, advocacy and social movement. And two, technology and disability. Three, inclusive pedagogical policy and practice. Four, arts, media, cultures, and religions. Five, public services and accessibility. Six, entrepreneurship, employment, social welfare, and economy. Seven, disaster mitigation. Eight, gender and youth. Nine, leadership and political representation. 10, disability, health, and well-being. 11, research and methodology in disability studies. 12, inclusive policy and governance. 13, family and social support. 14, STEM and disability. 15, bioengineering for disability. 16, universal design. And more than 2 decades in the UNCRPD has assisted all countries to disability inclusions. Many countries has committed to the UNCRPD, including Indonesia, Universitas Brawijaya, Indonesia, through Center for Disability Services, has taken part to encourage the disability inclusion initiatives mainly in education sectors. In this conference, we also have the plenary speakers. the Associate Professor Tiffany Wild, PhD, Architect Joseph Kwan, MH, Daniel Stubbs, Dr. Artemis Sakilariadis, and Mr. Fadilah Putra. And ladies and gentlemen, please let me kindly remind you about the plenary session 1, which will be started after the opening remarks by the rector, is from the Associate Professor Tiffany Wild, Architect Joseph Kwan, MH, and Daniel Stubbs. After that, we will have a parallel session 1, and following is the break. After the break, we will start the plenary session 2 by Dr. Artemis Sakilariadis and Mr. Fadilah Putra, PhD, and we'll start the parallel session 2, and after that, we will have the closing ceremony. Ladies and gentlemen, this international conference is hosted by the Center for Disability Services, Brawijaya University, or PLDUB. You can access us by visiting our website, the PLDUB, or following our Instagram account, PLDUB, or YouTube account, PLDUB, or maybe the TikTok account in PLDUB. We have many informations regarding our disability services in our social media account. Please kindly do follow us if you have those social media accounts. Dear ladies and gentlemen, and all to the attendee, we apologize in advance since we just have received a message from the Professor Widodo that he also has another agenda which he cannot leave. So we will moving forward to our next agenda is the plenary session, which will be led by the moderator, Ziyadatul Hikmiyah. Before Ms. Zia led this session, firstly, I will read her short bio first. Ms. Ziyadatul Hikmiyah, SPD, SPSI, MSc. She's a lecturer at Psychology Department, Brawijaya University. And also she is a counselor at Center of Disability Services, Brawijaya University. Okay, without further ado, please welcome Ms. Ziyadatul Hikmiyah, SPD, SPSI, MSc. The time and screen are yours.
Thank you very much, Miss Cindy. Good morning, everyone. My name is Zia, as been introduced by Mbak Cindy, Bu Cindy, just now. Thank you very much for your attendance, and I would like to also say hello to our beloved speakers that already join us here, Professor Tiffany Wild, PhD from the Ohio State University. Hello, Prof. Tiffany, or how should I address you if I would like to call you Prof. Wild or Prof. Tiffany?
Tiffany is just fine. Thank you so much.
Hello, how are you?
Good. Thank you for having me. I'm so honored to be here tonight. It's tonight in the United States.
Oh,
Excuse
yeah.
me. Good morning.
So it is actually 9 in the evening now, Prof. Tiffany Wild. Okay, before you begin, I would like to introduce to all of our participants about the amazing, the first panelists today. So, Associate Professor Tiffany Wild, PhD, is an assistant chair of Department of Teaching and Learning in the Ohio State University, United States. Her experiences in teaching middle and high school in Lancaster, Ohio, and Columbus, Ohio, has equipped her with a great experience in disability inclusion field. She will share her initiative in making STEM accessible for students with disability. Wow, that's wonderful. And actually, it's also very related to our situation here in Universitas Brawijaya, as we already known as one of the inclusive campus in Indonesia, Prof. Wild. Okay, so without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Tiffany Wild to deliver her material in this occasion. Time is yours.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank you for your invitation to this amazing conference. I was looking over the agenda, so many wonderful speakers and so many wonderful topics. I want to thank Tommy Hari Pramanda for the wonderful correspondence and helping me to prepare for this conference. So thank you so much. And again, good evening from Ohio in the United States. We're right in the center. And good morning to all of you. I'm going to share my presentation if I can. Right now it says it's disabled.
Okay, we will start this in a jiffy.
No problem.
While okay, you may try again now. I believe it's already.
There we go. Can you all see my screen okay? Great. So tonight I want to share with you some of the advocating that I've been doing to make science accessible to learners with visual impairments. As a child, I really loved science, and I completed science badges in Girl Scouts. I was a member of my science club in high school. I attended the International Science Fair, which ironically, the year that I attended it was actually held in the United States. So it wasn't very international, but I still was very honored to attend. I took all the science classes possible in high school, and my first undergraduate degree, I actually majored in mathematics and environmental science with a minor in chemistry. But I didn't have a lot of exposure to students or persons with disabilities or visual impairments. And so on this screen, I have a picture, whoops, excuse me. On this slide, I have a picture of Helen Keller. And Helen Keller is known as a deafblind individual in the United States. We all had to read her biography in high school and learn about her. That really was my first exposure, minus television. So on the right of my screen is a picture of Mary Ingalls from the 1800s in the United States, and the picture of the actress that played her on television. So that really was my first exposure. Mary Ingalls had a visual impairment. She became blind, and she led a blind school in the television series. So I watched very much from a distance, and that was my first exposure. I recently was cleaning out my closet, and I found a report that I had written about Louis Braille and about the Braille. And so on this slide, I have a picture of Louis Braille and the Braille system, the series of dots that create letters. And I read that report and I thought, wow, I really was onto something when I was younger, but I didn't quite have that path yet. On this slide is a picture of me when I first started teaching. This was my very first year in teaching, more than 20 years ago now, but I was a science teacher at a local public high school. And I had multiple students with visual impairments in my classroom, but I didn't know how to teach them. I had no understanding. I was very fearful of the safety of my students. My students were placed after they left me in a special education class. However, I knew that they didn't belong there. I knew that they had the academic ability and capabilities to be active in science. And it really bothered me that that happened. And I kept asking others, what do I do to teach these students who have visual impairments? And they kept saying, make things bigger on our copy machine. Well, when you do that, the letters aren't as clear and crisp. And so I actually was doing a disservice and I didn't know what to do, but I knew there was a better way. So I ended up teaching at a school that ended up closing. It merged with surrounding schools due to budget constraints. And so I was reading in the back of a teaching magazine about a program at Vanderbilt University. It was a graduate program. And immediately I knew that that was my answer. My answer was to get educated. I wanted to know how to teach students with visual impairments. And I also did my PhD in visual impairment education. I focused on science education and public policy. And so there's a picture of me with a young lady. This was when I was working on my degree to become a teacher of students with visual impairments. And the young woman is holding a felt covered styrofoam ball. And she has in front of her the phases of the moon. And those phases are tactile as well as having Braille underneath of them. And she was learning about the phases of the moon. So my first task was to understand what do we know about teaching science to students with visual impairments. And what we do know is that having a visual impairment is widely recognized to be particularly significant in math and science learning. We traditionally use methodologies to learn science that are very visual. We use a lot of pictures, we use a lot of videos, and that's not accessible for our students. We found that students with visual impairments have unique misconceptions from their sighted peers. So I'll talk about that in a little bit. And our general education teachers in the United States are not prepared to teach students with visual impairments. A lot of our teachers only get 45 minutes to an hour of instructional time on how to teach students who are blind and visually impaired. And on the flip side, our teachers of students with visual impairments are ill-prepared to teach STEM content because the teachers that are studying to become teachers of the blind, they do not study science. They don't study mathematics or engineering. And so therefore they don't have the learning that our science teachers have, and our science teachers don't know how to teach our students who are blind. And so it really creates a wall, an impasse, and our students are really struggling. The other challenge in science education was we just don't have a lot of research. In the United States, we have a law that requires us to teach based upon research. The problem is we do not have research in science education. A recent study that a project I was involved in, we had one of our graduate assistants look for every English written article about science education in students who are blind or visually impaired. There were 198 articles, but those articles went back as far as 1967. And a lot of them spoke about the launch of Sputnik that had happened in the 60s. And when we dug a little deeper to figure out what subject matter was taught, there were only 8 articles total in this entire time span of 50 plus years on chemistry. 14 on the geosciences, which is a little better because we can actually feel rocks and earth, but it's still very low for that time span. 5 biology articles, 2 on laboratory science, 1 on space science, and 1 on clinical sciences. And so most of the studies were not empirically based, and many offered suggestions for teaching, but no research to back up the claims. So I was left with this body of research that didn't really exist. I was really interested in space science. So I started my career looking at the misconceptions of science concepts that were made by students. So these are really looking at how do students who are blind or visually impaired understand science and what do they think are the meanings behind these science concepts. And so some of the misconceptions I found was that students believed classification was a cause of biodiversity. It's not a cause. We talk about classification when we talk about biological concepts, but it's not a cause. Some of the students talked about water pressure causing plate tectonic movement. One student talked about how the earth recycles material objects in volcanoes. And when this student was talking, this student talked about how the earth, we recycle things. So we recycle newspapers and we recycle tin cans, and we were recycling at the time some objects from the cafeteria. And the student was saying, oh, well, a volcano erupts and it shoots out newspapers. That's how it recycles. Well, for the sighted community, we know that that doesn't happen. But that child who didn't have the visual reference referred back to words that she had learned in school about recycling newspaper. Well, if the earth recycles, that logically made sense to her. So she was putting two concepts together. Very similar, I had another student talk about wild turkeys. So the wild birds that are found out in the wild weighing 1 million pounds. Again, this is not something that happens. We don't have birds that weigh 1 million pounds. But the student was talking about Thanksgiving, which in the United States we're about to celebrate, and we traditionally eat turkey. And they were saying that this turkey was a big bird. And he said, my mama says that we're going to have a big turkey dinner, and big equated to 1 million pounds. So he, again, putting two concepts together to make understanding about the world around him. Another student talked about clouds causing seasonal change, and that somehow the clouds on the earth would cause seasons. And he was getting confused with temperature and light. And so just a lot of misconceptions. And these are misconceptions that sighted peers do not have because they have that visual reference. So I started working on some advocacy, and I'm going to explain advocacy the way that I've been doing it to inform others about science and making science accessible. So one of the projects I worked on is a cross collaboration with engineering education in partnership with Dr. Deborah Grzybowski. And we were looking at 3D printing. And so on this screen is a picture of a cell, a traditional picture of a cell with organelles that have been labeled. In the center is the 3D print that I worked with engineers. And you'll notice that in this 3D print, the organelles, you can take them apart. They're sitting in ballistics gel to represent cytoplasm. The colors are very visually different. They have high contrast. And the texture, everything had been sanded down. And so that project was a learning experience for the engineering department to understand the needs of our students in terms of high contrast models, tactile models. On the right-hand side is a CAD drawing of those same cells. And the CAD drawing is what the engineers were putting together to create the 3D print. And I didn't know about how to do that part. And so it truly was this cross collaboration where they were teaching me their science of 3D printing, and they were learning from me about the needs of our students and the tactile needs and things that they can do in their engineering classes to help students understand who are blind and visually impaired. Another advocacy project that I'm involved in is called Project Inspire, and I put the Project Inspire link up on the slide. Anybody can access this material. It's open resource at www.pathstoliteracy, all one word, .org/resource/project-inspire/. And this project, we learned that students who are blind and visually impaired needed extra help with math and science. So on the screen is a green owl with glasses reading a book, and the words Project Inspire in black with Braille underneath. That's the logo for our project. And Mission Inspire is the next photo, and it's over here on the right. And it's a STEM bowl that we operate in science. And again, it looks like a mission patch with a rocket coming up out of clouds with USC Upstate Project Inspire in green with Braille underneath, and that same owl peeking up from the bottom. This project engages students from across the United States in order to learn online mathematical concepts with the Nemeth code, and we will be doing UEB technical beginning next year. And we taught science concepts because our students, we found, were not accessing and able to be part of science projects at their school through science fairs and science initiatives. And so we taught students how to blast off rockets. And we built these rockets online, and they took data and made presentations. And I would love to spend the rest of the time talking to you about this Project Inspire, but I encourage you to go to the website. And again, it's advocacy through teaching of the students. I also have advocacy through research, and I encourage you, if you ever get a chance to participate in a research study. Recently, I engaged in a research study called Access and Engagement, and the cover of the Access and Engagement report is on this slide, and you can find that at the American Foundation for the Blind website. Over 1,400 participants across North America filled out a survey so that we could better understand what was happening during the COVID-19 shutdown of our schools. And what we found was that our students who are blind and visually impaired were really challenged during the COVID-19 shutdown. They didn't have access to those visual online learning. And of course, that impacted their STEM learning, their STEM engagement, and what had happened. This turned into, from all that data that we collected from the participants, we wrote up advocacy statements, had presenting around the country about the needs of our students and how to make online teaching accessible. I also do advocacy in my curriculum writing. I wrote a health guidebook. In the United States, we found out that we did not at the time have a curriculum specifically designed to teach health and biological concepts to our students with visual impairments. And so I was asked to write a guidebook after this was identified as a problem multiple years by researchers across the country. And so on the left-hand side is a cover of the Health Education Guidebook. Once we went into the COVID-19 epidemic and pandemic, we actually wrote a chapter that can be a free download for any teacher to use to teach students who are blind and visually impaired all about the COVID-19 pandemic, what the virus looks like, how to prevent the virus. And so on the right-hand side of the screen is a young woman who is looking at a tactile diagram of a virus, which is actually an orange with some push pins, and then also comparing that to a large print virus model that's found on an iPad. And so you can access that at www.aph.org/product/health education for students with visual impairments, a guidebook for teachers too. And so if you go to that website, you'll be able to download that curriculum for free. I also do a lot of speaking, and presenting at conferences not specific to disabilities has been something that I've been wanting to engage in more. And I say that because we need to tell others about the information that we have. And so on this slide is a picture of me presenting at the National Science Teaching Association, and the room was packed. It was standing room only. And my overall message to every attendee was that, quote, students with disabilities want to be fully included to the best of their abilities in the classroom. I also advocate through my writing. I was engaged in a book called Towards Inclusion of All Learners Through Science Teacher Education with some phenomenal researchers across the country engaged in science education for students with disabilities. On the screen is the cover of that book, and I'm not here to sell books, but only to tell you that the advocacy came in the form of ensuring that a chapter was written about students learning who were blind and visually impaired, and that we also included other disability groups that are often forgotten about in these types of books. And at the beginning of that book are stories written by persons with disabilities. And the second half is all the research that supports the methodologies that we need to use in order to make science accessible. The latest project I've been involved is advocacy and a call to action. And this is the National Research Agenda in STEM. And this material is based upon work supported by the National Science Foundation, project number HRD 2032668. I'm required to say this. Any opinions, findings, and conclusions or recommendations expressed in this material are those of the author and do not necessarily reflect the views of the National Science Foundation. On this slide is our logo, and that is a test tube on a stand, and in the test tube is a picture of a beaker to represent science, the on switch on your computer to represent technology, a gear to represent engineering, and the pi symbol to represent mathematics. STEM is in black, and underneath is STEM in simulated braille in red. What we did was we created goal statements. And we, for each one of the goal statements, we have a description of the goal and background information to justify the goal, with recommended strategies for achieving the goal, the research that needs to be conducted in order to meet the standards of the goal, as well as developmental projects, such as creation of new technology that also needs to be conducted. We developed goal statements around 12 themes. And so what this project did was it brought together 27 experts across North America that were involved in science, technology, engineering, and math research, and developers, parents, teachers, students who had recently graduated who were blind and visually impaired, as well as blind and visually impaired researchers and developers. This community came together under the direction of myself, Dr. Derek Smith, who is known for his research in mathematics education for students who are blind. Also, Dr. Stacy Kelly, who is known for her work in assistive technology, and Dr. Janine Fast, who is with me at The Ohio State University, and her work is in elementary education. And what I'm proud to announce is that our division, or our group that we're involved in, not only am I involved in the program in visual impairments, but our section is called in STEAM. We are now called Inclusive Science, Technology, Engineering, Art, and Mathematics Education. And we're very proud that we are having a name that represents this inclusive nature of STEM education, STEAM education. And we're excited about all the changes that are happening to our program to really promote inclusion across STEAM. But back to the goals of our project. The document has goals around collaboration, working with multiple people, organizations, and across the world. Access to curriculum. We want to ensure that our students who are blind and visually impaired have access to all STEM content. Skills to succeed in STEM, looking to see what skills students really need to have prior to entering STEAM classrooms. Assessments for STEM education. In the United States, we are required to assess students at particular grade levels. Unfortunately, those assessments are not always accessible for our students the way that some would really like them. So we are spending some time in that goal to really look at assessments. Instruction, to ensure that all instruction is accessible for all students with visual impairments. We have goals around early learners. What does it mean to be an early learner, a science learner at a young age, like the very first slide I was talking to you about tonight? School age learners, excuse me. So those students who are in high schools and upper level grades, what does their education need to look like? Identity. What does it mean to be a science learner with a visual impairment or blindness? What does it mean to be a mathematics learner? And really promoting the identity that you too can be a scientist or a mathematician, even with a disability like visual impairment, blindness. We want to have empower students to have that identity. Mentorship and training, really guiding students to meet others who have blindness and visual impairment that are in STEM careers, and promoting STEM careers for those students. And what does that mean? What does that mean to enter a STEM career and transition from high school to college and beyond? Technology exploration, making sure all of our technology is accessible. Personnel preparation, making sure that our college programs are preparing our teachers properly. Remember, I told you that our research right now shows that our teachers who are STEM teachers do not receive much instruction on teaching students who are blind or visually impaired. We would like to change that. And advocacy, a theme that's coming throughout everything that I'm talking about, but really becoming an advocate. And what does that mean for being an advocate for accessibility and for students who are blind and visually impaired? We have many resources on a website that we developed. We have a copy of our National Agenda booklet. It's over 60 pages full of resources and information. There's a spreadsheet, an overview of all the research found. You can search it by author, by subject matter, and we'll be updating that in the future. But right now it goes up to 2021 of all the articles that we could find in English. Resources for education and research. If you have a question or concern about making something accessible, you can go to the resources tab, scroll through that, and really learn about what's available on the web or across the country or across the world. We have a compilation of biographies of all the personnel that are involved in the project and an electronic downloadable copy of the booklet. You can also sign up on that website for alerts. The website is https://u.osu.edu/National Research STEM Visual Impairment, all one word, /. And again, that's an open resource with tons of information on making STEM accessible. The use of our website materials are for advocacy. The agenda really identifies needs within our field, as well as research-based methods that are identified on the website. Again, I go back to research. For those of you that need that research, we have that database available of all the articles. And for grant writing, the agenda can be referenced as proof of the need of the variety of grant projects or the variety of projects that we need in our field. So what can you do to be an advocate for science and STEM education, or just to be an advocate for our students with visual impairments? Share your story, share your experiences. Many people, like I did, had no experience with students or persons with visual impairment beyond what I saw on the television screen. Share your stories. Include books, videos, and materials of persons with disabilities in your classrooms, on your social media, and in your organization. I'm constantly sharing stories and videos on my social media pages as well. Keep lists of resources for others. Be the person that people come to when they have a problem or a concern or a question about working with students with visual impairments, persons with disabilities, or accessibility, or point those to the researchers or the experts that have that expertise. Speak out. Use resources to help your voice, the needs and concerns. Be an ally for all those who have disabilities. Different ways we've done this. I want to show real quick. This isn't really science, but our students at the university have been making tactile books for young children. And the center picture is of all of our students in our program. And then they've created tactile books, which are raised images with Braille on them. We give those to new mothers who have just had babies born in our area who are blind or visually impaired. And for many of them, this is their first Braille or tactile book. We also provide advocacy with our students. We have a program called Dining in the Dark, which we blindfold our students And then students across campus and hospitality have to serve us. And we have rich conversations about the experience of being served as well as eating that evening. And it's a shared experience. We also have a college mentor program where our students will go out and tell others about visual impairment. So in the picture on this screen, we have a young person that's holding 6 cells. So 6, they're egg cartons, but they make the 6 cells and they're putting ping pong balls in the different cell areas to create Braille letters. I have many references for you. If you'd like to contact me, I can be contacted at wild.13@osu.edu. And on this screen is 2 pictures of me, one with a headset and a computer behind me, and one I'm in the access trainer at SciViz, which is Space Camp for the Blind and Visually Impaired. I can't thank you enough for having me, and I'm open to any questions if we have time. Thank you so much.
That's a wonderful material that you already deliver, Prof. Wild. I believe that all of our participants also have a lot of insights from your material. We could see that from your explanation that we know that maybe more than 70% of learning process happen visually and from visual cues. So I could totally imagine that it's such a struggle for students with visual impairment to understand the material. And even so, the scientific material or science area. And here in our university, we also have some students with visual impairment. We also have one staff, Pak Tommy, actually, with visual impairment. And I believe that they already make a lot of adjustment, and it needs a lot of adjustment as well in the curriculum, in the module, like what you said previously. And from your material, from your explanation, we already have some inspiration what to do next. We can see that you made a 3D printing for the model of the earth, and also some curriculum modules and booklet that has some tactiles inside it. In fact, one of our staff here also made a storybook with tactiles stuff inside it. For example, like water, she make it like in the plastic containing of water.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's amazing, and we need more of it because sometimes children with visual impairment still have a very limited access toward those kind of materials. That's amazing, Prof. Wild. I really want to talk more and more, but I'm as a moderator, I would like to invite our attendees and maybe our panelists as well to join the discussion here. So you could raise your hand or maybe type your question in the question and A box. Okay, please.
I also wanted to say real quick as you were talking, the
Yeah.
things that we do for our students who are blind and visually impaired, they work for all students. So when you were talking about the water in a book, wouldn't that be great if all little kids had that same access to make that concept? So I always tell my students, everything that we do benefits all. It's all part of universal design. It's just universal design in ways that people haven't talked about before. So that just reminded me of that. So thank you so much for your kind comments.
Thank you. That's amazing. Yeah. To make it accessible for all. I think that's the most important as well. Okay. Is there any question from our attendees with Prof. Wild here? And maybe while waiting for the question, I also noted one another amazing thing from your presentation about the transition to college. I think it's also very important. Maybe do you have like some strategies to encourage a student with visual impairments to continue the study in the university or college? Because we know that in university, in college, the STEM is not really as simple as the previous as simple as previously. It it becomes more abstract, more vague in terms of the concept and everything. So what would you suggest for this?
So the first thing that we do is really exposing students to mentors that have made it through the programs, right? That can show that I did this, I got that degree, you can too. And so through the Project Inspire, one of the things that we did was we showed students videos about a blind scientist and how that blind scientist used sound to interpret data from NASA. And they were all they had no idea that even happened, and or that you could do that, or they could work for NASA, because NASA's about space, and a lot of students just thought, oh, that's not attainable. So really it's the exposure first of those mentors that really understand and can say, I attended college, and then going to colleges and really being part of that conversation of making things accessible. So a lot of professors, they just have never had a student who are blind or visually impaired in their chemistry lab. And so we spend some time saying, here's some accessible equipment that student may need, or here's some ways to make your PowerPoints accessible. So my PowerPoint that I gave tonight, what you don't realize is every picture that I showed, I tried to voice over, but also if you were to get a copy of that, it also has descriptions. So little things like that, we spend a lot of time and just sharing with others. But the biggest piece of advice, there's a website in the United States from the American Foundation for the Blind, and they have a career, it's called Career Connect. And it's all kinds of people in all kinds of different jobs that are blind and visually impaired. And they share their stories and how they got their degrees or how they got their jobs. And that is just a powerful, powerful way to get our kids ready to transition.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I think here we little bit miss in the the power of mentorship itself. I think it's very powerful for the student to encourage them. Exactly, I totally agree with you, Prof. Wild. So maybe we can start the mentorship program here to encourage students. Actually, we already have some questions from the moderator. It's a very insightful material. And then I'm curious, how do you manage to teach students with visual impairments during pandemic?
Oh, that's a really good question. So what had happened was our teachers were teaching very visually, go to this website, and it wasn't accessible. And what we had started Project Inspire, and we thought it was going to be this novel thing that we were going to be the first to do online learning, and the COVID environment shut us down. So the way that we have done a lot of the teaching online, we voice over, meaning we put voice to all the pictures. And what we did was we sent boxes of materials. So the students got everything that they needed in both print and Braille and large print. And why we did that was because we wanted the parents who may not know Braille to have access to what the students were learning. And the students would have all the materials that they needed in front of them in Braille. So that was the first step. The second step was we made sure all the materials to do any of the experiments that we did were in that box and ready to go. And we were very careful to put materials in baggies that made noise. So we could say, go to this bag, and they had not only a tactile clue, but a clue that they could hear to access the materials. And then we talked them through and used clues like when we were building rockets, we would say, place the triangle with a 90-degree angle towards you. So we were using mathematical terms in very specific language. And then they would put their little models in front of us, and we'd say, yes, you're on the right track. This looks great. So they were getting feedback immediately from us, as well as getting auditory cues and that Braille right in front of them. So everything was fully accessible. So it's a lot of pre-planning when you teach online. And if you give websites, we gave some website references, we must make sure that they're accessible, that they have voiceover, that their screen readers are accessible as well. I hope that gives a little bit of insight of how we did it.
Okay, I think that's a very detailed explanation about what's going on during the pandemic. But I do believe that that's more effort to do, right? You have to do more effort and more detailed material to be given, and also to be accessed easily by the student. You totally think about every little detail about that. Oh, wow, that's
We
amazing.
we tried, but we were still learning along the way. Like for the next iteration, we know that we need to give them a little model of a rocket because some students had never seen a rocket and they're trying to build a rocket. So we learn just as much from the students as they've taught us. And as soon as we get the right combination, it goes out so everybody can have access. So you don't need to do that pre-planning. We have done it for you, and you can download it and have everything that you need in order to run the same sort of curriculum with your students. And the same thing, I did the same thing with the health curriculum as well.
Thank you very much. I hope it answers your question, Gadis. I do believe so, yeah. Okay, and we also have another question for a while from Bu Zubaida. Actually, Bu Zubaida is our chief in Center of Disability, and also she is also the lecturer in chemistry here in Universitas Brawijaya. She would like to know the transition program for students with disability from high school to university as well. Maybe Bu Zubaida, do you want to open your microphone? Or maybe you can just directly answer the question, Prof. Weil.
Sure. So when students leave high school in the U.S., we have the Americans with Disabilities Act is a law that requires our students to have access, and so they meet with our what we call the ADA, Americans with Disability, the ADA office, and they create a written plan for the students, which tells us everything as an instructor that we need to do. Things like extended time on tests, access to Braille books. For chemistry, we do have talking probes that will tell us when titrations change color. So we have accessible equipment that the student may need. So all of those things are written into a plan. That plan is sent to every professor. And then we can also meet with the student one-on-one and get some more information. However, the difference is this is student initiated. Adults do not initiate this program or this policy for the students. The students have to self-identify that they need additional assistance, and this is any disability. And then that written plan can go into place. Once the plan is put into place, then the resources we must follow it by law, and resources are put in place. We have counselors, so we have people that the students can come to, and they can discuss all their needs along with the professors.
I totally can imagine about that, and I think it's like an individual plan for them to plan their transition, plan what they need, and they based on their interests and also their what their dream maybe, yeah, in the future, their goals, yeah. Okay, and then we also have another question from Kathleen Meira Berta. Hi Tiffany, I'm Kathleen. I'm interested in teaching children since I have a part-time job and as an English private lesson teacher. I'm very inspired by how care you are about your student, and you're clearly trying to find the best way to teach all students equally. My question is, in the education field in Indonesia, there are still dilemma whether children with disability, included visual impairments and blind, should attend the same school with those who don't have any disability. This become a huge dilemma since children below 15 are vulnerable in terms of physical well-being. Do you have any research thoughts or best practice in regards of this? Furthermore, there's another question as well.
That's fine.
Do you have any experience in teaching adults who haven't been exposed with Braille or not having any social life? Since I found in Indonesia, family are still think that having disability children are a shame. Does family kept their disability children inside the house all the time until they become an adult. Yeah, that's the
Yes.
fact sometimes.
Yeah.
While.
So I'll start with the research. I have some research and it is in review to be printed, but I will share it with you. So hot off the press, hopefully soon. The research that we did, we looked at what we did. There's a national database in the United States called that put together a study called the National Transitional Longitudinal Study. So what we did was in the US, we followed students who were young all the way through high school. And we asked them all kinds of questions in their families. And so what I did was I worked with Dr. Kelly, who I mentioned earlier. We dug into this database to see if there were what kinds of things really influenced test scores and outcomes for students. So we looked at things like extended time, talking calculators, all the things we thought would benefit them. The number one, all those things didn't matter. Statistically, what mattered was that the students were in classrooms with their peers, with their what we call regular ed, those peers without disabilities. If they were in classrooms with students without disabilities, they had better social outcomes. That literature has also been researched, and better academic outcomes. So yes, that research is out there, and I can provide more information about that. I've done a talk about that, and I can provide papers about the social outcomes as well. So to answer the first part of your question, yes, the research is out there that if they're with their gen ed peers, their peers without disabilities, they have better outcomes in life. In terms of working with students that have not been exposed and don't get those services until they're adults, yes, I have had experience with that. We've actually had some people from other countries that I've actually worked with that came to the United States for those services. And really, it's what we would call take small steps. Really telling them and reassuring them that you can do these things, getting to meet people with disabilities, getting the families who have sheltered individuals to meet other families that have people with disabilities so they can talk and converse and have a social interaction with others. And then really slowly introducing them to academic and social skills. And it's a slower process, and you have to be very patient, very understanding. There can be a lot of feelings involved, but it can happen. And you start with just showing them what others have done, and that with a little bit of your help and trust in you, they can do that as well. And they'll come around, but it will take some time. I hope that helped to answer your question. And yes, I'm very passionate about teaching students with visual impairments. I'm so glad you picked up on that. That's a big compliment to me. Thank you.
Wonderful, Prof. Wild. Okay, thank you for the question, Kathleen. I hope Prof. Wild already answered all of your question. And here in Indonesia, actually, we have separate or special school for students with disabilities. And actually, some of the special school also have some specialization. For example, like special school for deaf students, special school for visual impaired students. Do you also have the same or similar thing in the US?
We do. So we do have schools that are for students who are blind, students who are deaf, we have schools for students with autism. And so we do have specialized schools, but sometimes those specialized schools are what we call drop-in programs, where the student may go there for special skills. So that students who were in a car accident, lost their vision as a 15 or 16-year-old may go to the School for the Blind to learn Braille and return home. Other programs, they stay for their entire school age, especially students who have more significant multiple disabilities. So we do have both models, and we have students who attend both. And I have worked with students at both schools for the blind, as well as in the public school system that we have in the US. And both are great programs. The schools for the blind have band and sports that sometimes public schools don't have. So it's determining what's best for the child. And there's a process that you have to really look at to see will the child be best served in the public schools or in the special schools? But even the students who are in special schools go on to go to college and go on to careers. And so both that career and that transition mentoring happen in both settings.
Okay, so it's absolutely up to the student themselves, and also up to the family themselves. And is the specialized school is equal to the other degree in the same, for example, like middle school and high school, they also have that as well?
Yes, they do. So they have preschool, which is early learners, all the way up through high school. And in the United States, we actually also have a college called Gallaudet University, specifically for individuals who are deaf and hard of hearing. So that's the only specialized college, but we do have one in the United States.
Okay, I think we have similar system here in Indonesia, except the college. We don't have a specialized college for deaf and blind. But whether or not it is best, which one is best, it's totally up to the person themselves and also the family, right, Prof. Wild?
Yeah, there's a whole, we have a team meeting of experts, the parents, the child, teachers, and they make a determination what's the best educational placement for the student, whether it be at a special school or a special classroom in a public school, or spending all time in public schools. So we have what we call a continuum. We have multiple placement options for students with disabilities.
That's very interesting. Thank you very much for your answer, Prof. Wild. I believe that myself, and also all of the participants have so much insights from you, and also from the questions and answer itself. So I would like to invite the participants, maybe if you still have more questions to Prof. Wild, could you please just type it in the text box or in the Q&A box? I think we still have one more question left for our time here. Okay, I think there's one question from Eka Christian from Surabaya, but I'm so sorry, I don't really catch the meaning of the question. So maybe Eka Christian, could you please open your mic and deliver your question? I think it's related to the NASA line of work for students with visual impairment. Maybe out of curiosity, because we hardly imagine how a student or people with visual impairment can work for NASA. Maybe you can tell us more about it, Prof. Wild.
Sure. So I'm actually on a project right now where we're developing curriculum to teach students about astronomy. And so unfortunately, it's the curriculum is not made public yet because we are still testing it and learning from students and teachers. So when it does, I hope to share it with all of you, and I can at least share the news release if people are interested. But we're doing a lot of work around 3D printing and 3D printing models of constellations, planets, star patterns. I also was inspired from this work by a teacher of the blind who was interviewed by Oprah Winfrey, who is a big name in the United States, if you've heard of her. She interviewed this teacher, and he had made a tactile planetarium. And the way that he had done this was he took a tent, a dome tent, and took round soda can lids, so round plastic lids of various sizes. The various sizes represented various brightnesses of stars, and he put them all around this dome tent to represent constellation patterns. I was amazed by that, and I spent a week just learning from him. And I worked with Noreen Grice, and her work, she has a book called about accessible astronomy, and she writes all about how to make astronomy accessible. She's actually on this project with us as an advisor. I'm so excited. And we do a lot with trying to look at patterns of data, and you can do that through sonification. So if you think of a curve, we go from a curve that goes low to high. So if you saw clusters of data from NASA and on this bell curve, you might, and I'm not a good singer, but I will try. So you might hear as you make curves. And so those curved noises provide an audio reference for our students who are blind to interpret the different, what different graphs look like. And so our blind scientist who works for NASA talks about how she puts sound to all of her graphics. And so it's just been an incredible learning experience for me working with scientists from NASA on this project, learning their content knowledge to say, okay, this is what our students need who are blind. And so as soon as that curriculum becomes available, like I said, we're still testing, and we would never put anything out without input from our own students. So once we have that perfected, we're going to put that out and allow everybody access to all of these graphics, all of the tactiles, and all the images. So you too can do the similar curriculum so that older students and middle school students can learn about science, but also that sonification has been a wonderful instrument that our scientists are using at NASA.
Yeah, that's totally fascinating, Prof. Wild, to have a sonification to describe the graph. I think we actually can also do that in our lectures, for example, like to explain the curve or the data. I think in every kind of field, we can also do that sonification.
Yes.
I think it will
Yes.
really help. And also,
And
yeah.
people can visualize. When I went my low voice, you could visualize something low to high. And so again, that sonification benefits all of our students. It's just another way for them to get information, another mode of learning that stimulates, I get to the neuroscience, it stimulates the brain and opens it up for learning. And so what works again for our students with that sonification works for all students.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it makes learning sounds fun. And
Yes.
it also enhances the learning process itself for a while.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, that's very fascinating. And hopefully we can have a lot of inspiration, from this session from Prof. Wild. And also, you also said that you always listen to to the feedback from your students and be present. And also you encourage students to always speak up their need to do their advocates themselves. Okay,
Yes.
I think we need to listen a little bit more of maybe you can give us a closing statement to maybe encourage us here as the lecturers and also teachers in Indonesia. Please, Prof. Wild.
But first of all, again, I am just so excited to be here, and I want to thank all of you. My biggest piece of advice is to listen to your students. They have lived the experience. I am a sighted person. I haven't lived their experience, but I can listen to them and learn from them. So learn from your students. Ask what's best for them. Listen to what they tell you, how they learn. And if they are quiet and they don't tell you, just be patient and try your best to listen as much as you can closely to their stories and reach out. If there's something that you know a student may need, even though they don't vocalize it, reach out to those experts who know. I think that's very vital too, to reach out to experts, be willing to learn, as I always did, like going to SciViz, to Space Camp to learn how to do those kinds of things. That's my two biggest pieces of advice. And I wish you all well. And don't forget to advocate. Always tell our students stories to anybody who will listen, because we really need to make this world a more accessible place. Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful, wonderful. We can give applause for Professor Wild here. Thank you very much for your valuable time in this evening in the US. Hopefully,
Yes.
all of us, I believe, already make a little scribble about to be present and to speak out and to advocate and everything from this session. Thank you again for your material profile, and I wish you all the best and be healthy all the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I wish you the best with the remainder of your conference. Thanks again for having me.
Thank you. See you. And good night.
Good night.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, we already follow the material and the presentation, the amazing presentation from Professor Tiffany Weil. And now we would like to invite all of you to have a little bit of short break while waiting for our next panelists to deliver the presentation. So our staff will also give you some information in terms of in the form of videos, and also in the some point of information, and maybe little bit of refreshment. You can enjoy it yourself virtually in your house. Yeah, maybe for about 10 to 15 minutes. Thank you very much and see you. Okay, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, in the first Icon Day of 2022. Among us now, we already have architect Joseph Kwan, MH. Mr. Kwan already among us. So Mr. Kwan is the Deputy Vice President Asia Pacific at Rehabilitation International, and also the Director Region for WP Architecture for All at UIA Hong Kong. Hello, Mr. Kwan.
Good morning. Lovely to see you all. Lovely to see everyone this morning.
Yeah, good morning. What time is it there in Hong Kong?
I think we're just about 11 o'clock. 11. Yes.
Okay, not so much difference in terms of time.
That's right.
Okay, I would like to maybe give a little bit of introduction about you, Mr. Kwan, if I may. Okay, so architect Joseph Kwan MH is an architect and accessibility consultant with more than 36 years of experience across countries, such as in Australia, United Kingdom, France, and Hong Kong for more than 36 years. In this session, we will hear him share his initiative toward disability inclusion in the field of architecture that focuses on universal design and access in the development of environment, transportation, and inclusive tourism. That sounds very important and so exciting. So I would like to invite Mr. Joseph Kwan. Time is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me. Because I do have a lot to share with you. It's a very huge topic, in terms of disability inclusion in architecture. And, we talk about universal design. We want to talk about environment, built environment, transportation, and inclusive tourism. So it's a very huge topic, which I would like to cover very quickly in the next 30 minutes, okay? So bear with me if I speak a bit too fast, but I will share my PowerPoint with you now. Let me see, I hope I can do all this. Technically, I will share now. Okay, this one. Share. Okay, are we getting there? Are we?
Yes.
Okay, good. I can't see you, but I can see my slides. Kind of for some reason. Okay, all right. I shall start now. That's the topic of the matter. It's very interesting. It's fascinating that you decided to talk about this topic, and it's talk about universal design and inclusive architecture. That's where I come from. That's my expertise. So, very beginning, we talk about advocacy, okay, and international movement. I'd like to show you first where that comes in and why we're doing it, and what is the international movements. Y2K, the year 2000, we had the Millennium Development Goal, the MDG 2000, and of course at that time they were trying to set out what we need to focus on for the next 100 years, if you like. Unfortunately, the MDG had a lot of shortcomings. It did not address many issues, just like accessibility, inclusion, for inclusive design for people with disabilities, etc. So by the year 2015, we decided, no, we must readdress this. And the United Nations came out with the SDG, Sustainable Development Goal, at 2015. So let's look at that, what that is all about. So the SDG, I think most of you is probably aware of it now. The SDG has 17 goals. And basically, the issue is the world is growing, population is growing, and people are moving from the rural area into the urban area. So, you know, this rapid urbanization obviously put a lot of pressure on many resources like water, sewage, living environment, and public health. So there needs to be an issue to address this sort of mass migration into the cities. So the 17 goals were developed, and then out of the 17 goals you see there, it addresses different issues about poverty, about hunger, etc. The one that focused on us, the built environment most, is goal number 11. It basically says sustainable cities and communities. What does that mean? Goal 11 specify that we have to make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. The word we focus on is inclusive. Inclusion, who includes who, and need to be safe. Who's it safe by and why, etc. So inclusion and safe. Let's remember those two key words as we go along. There it is. We basically need to change the way we think because the cities are growing. You know, we're talking about these bigger cities. Bigger city is a city with more than 10 million people. I'm sure in Indonesia alone, you probably have a number of mega cities with more than 10 million people. We need to address how we deal with people in those situations. Okay, so that's the way we go. Have to go inclusive and safe. And then the indicators, disability indicators in the SDG. By the year 2030, we says we must provide access for all to adequate, safe, and affordable housing. 11.2 says access to safe, affordable, accessible, and sustainable transportation system. That's what we're talking about today, right? Housing, built environment, and transportation. And thirdly, basically provide access to environments that are accessible, in particular for women, children, older persons, and persons with disabilities. So these are our key indicators that we need to deal with, and hopefully by 2030, you in Indonesia and everywhere else in the world can achieve majority of those goals. Okay. At the same time, in Asia Pacific, the United Nations get together, you know, with SCAP, which is a region for Asia Pacific, every 10 years to discuss the way forward. So we have what we call the decade for disabled. we had just finished the third decade. In other words, 30 years, just finished this year, in fact, the third decade for Asia Pacific. And basically 10 years ago, that was discussed in Incheon in Korea. That's why it's called the Incheon strategy. And the motto from Incheon is to make the right real, make the right real. The right, I will show you in a minute, what is that word right means. So that is what we're saying. Basically means the rights of persons with disabilities. To make that real, it should not be just concepts, etc. Let's make it real and doable and make things applicable to our daily lives, etc. So that's what an Incheon strategy. And within an Incheon strategy, there are 10 goals, 27 targets, and 62 indicators. Okay, like I said, we just finished the third decade. In fact, in Indonesia hosted this big conference recently, and then a new set of mottos, criteria will be set for basically the fourth decade from 2023 onwards for the next 10 years. So let's see what we need to do for the next 10 years then. The 10 goals, make the right real, is more importantly, the one goal number 3, we need to enhance the access to physical environment, public transportation, knowledge, information, and communication. What sometimes say ICT, information, communication technology, ICT. So the built environment, public transport, ICT. And goal number 7, which we talked about briefly today, is to ensure we are disability inclusive disaster risk reduction, DIDRR, disability inclusive disaster risk reduction, which I will share with you briefly. So these are the 2 goals we need to focus on for our decade. And you can see on the left side, the Incheon strategy, the 10 different goals. And on the right-hand side is the SDG. It has 17 different goals. You can see the interrelationship of Incheon strategy and our SDGs. Now, the other big event that happened was World Humanitarian Summit. That was held in Istanbul in the year 2016. And what did I talk about? Basically, agenda for humanity. There are 5 different core responsibilities. And the one that basically is closest for us is core responsibility number 3. What does it say? The motto says to leave no one behind. Let's remember that simple motto, core number 3, to leave no one behind. That means people with disabilities, women and girls, young people, the displaced, among the people we should not leave behind. These are the people we need to help and assist and protect and empower, because these are the most vulnerable groups. Leave no one behind. That's a motto we should all remember. Okay. The third international movement we had is Habitat 3, the United Nations Conference on Housing and Sustainable Urban Development. Why is this important? Just look, Habitat 3 conferences, it's held every 20 years. Every 20 years, 1976, 1996, and the year 2016. I was fortunately involved in 2016, where that was held in Quito, in Ecuador, in Latin America and South America. So at that time in Quito, a lot of things to discuss, because every 20 years, we need to see, once again, urban situation. And from that, they said the theme is to come up with a new urban agenda, the new urban agenda on the habitat. Okay, so these are information you can download, you can access on the website. So look into that, the new urban agenda from Habitat 3. And from that particular meeting, information was discussed. And basically, these are different items that was discussed, different topics that was discussed. And from that, you can see one of the issues are still safe cities and sustainable cities. Even Habitat 3, we talk about very common issues like the SDG, etc. So these are the things we need to focus and address globally. And of course, they have exhibitions. And from that, obviously, there's a draft, what they call an outcome document. A draft outcome document was prepared for Habitat 3. So once again, check out on the website. You can download that particular document and see where we need to go in terms of new urban agenda. And during the same time, too, UN DESA. DESA is the Division of Economic Social Affairs, we also had a high-level forum of which we discussed disability inclusion and accessible urban development. Okay, and I was particularly involved in that one. And from there, a paper was proposed, new practices were proposed, in which a number of people were asked to contribute. And I was fortunate enough to be one of the contributors to this particular publication. Came out from the, you could say, the Habitat 3. So I'm sure you're all aware of the Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities. That's the right that people with disabilities have rights like everybody else. This convention has 50 different articles, and it was adopted by the General Assembly in the year 2000 and basically entered into force in the year 2008. You can see that what we call the signatories, the latest figures on that one. You, Indonesia, have your country have basically agreed in the year 2000 to be a signatory of the convention. You basically say, yes, that is it. Very good. We agree that with the concept of the convention, and you basically ratify. Ratify means you basically sign the an agreement to say you ratify the convention and you would do certain things. So this is Indonesia. The year 2011, you actually ratify the convention in which your country has to do certain things, has to comply with the convention, and of course report to the UN committee on the convention. So your country is doing that, I'm sure. So that is the map, the way things are. People, countries that have signed and to ratify, etc. Once again, all this information is available on the UN Enable website. Very quickly, it came to force. The 3 articles we should take notice is article number 3 on definition. So even at the definition stage, very early on, article 2 out of the 50 articles, it says the definition of universal design. So way ahead, very early, we have to discuss universal design. Article number 9 talks about accessibility, specifically on accessibility. We can see what that's all about. And article number 30, I thought is important because it says we need to allow everybody to participate in cultural life, recreation, leisure, and sports. So the definition of universal design. Universal design was invented or coined by an architect called Ron Mace in the year 1988. The definition basically says designs of products, environments, programs, and services to be usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design. So it's not only the built environment, it could be designed for a product, designed for a program and services to be used by majority of people without making it many specific changes, say one thing's for the disabled, one for the able, one for the young, one for the old. No, we're saying one design where possible can accommodate many people as far as possible. And of course, we'll talk about the universal design in a minute. Then article number 9 is accessibility. Basically, you can just look at that in detail. In brief, basically, we need to take appropriate measures to achieve this aim for people to live independently and to participate fully in every aspect of life. It means equal access to the physical environment, to transportation, ICT, both in urban and rural environment. Okay, so look that up, and that's what we need to implement, in fact, to comply with article number 9. And look at the people we are serving. The WHO report basically says in the world, 15% of the people has a disability. And we're talking about now almost 1 billion people. And 80% of those live in developing countries like for us in Asia Pacific. The latest report I heard now, the global population a few days ago just reached 8 million people. 8 million people, the whole world, of which now we say 1 billion, 1/8 of the population has some sort of special needs. Okay, 1/8. Okay, this is the new figures now we need to consider. That's people with disabilities. Indonesia, how many people do you have? Your estimate, 2014 estimate, is that 10 to 15% of Indonesia population has a disability. That means 270 million people with Indonesia, of which there's an estimate of something like 27 to 40 million people with a disability lives in the country. So that's a huge number. That is, in fact, 2 or 3 or 4 mega cities of people with disabilities living in your country. And how do you address that in terms of providing accessibility, equal access to the built environment, transportation, and even tourism, etc. So these are figures you do remember. You need to address that. That's your people you need to deal with. Of course, with the 10 to 15 million percent of people with disabilities, you need to look at the smaller aspect of that, which are the mobility impaired, the vision impaired, the hearing impaired, the speech impaired, the intellectual impaired, and all the others. And there are something like 500 known disabilities. So once again, these are a subset of people you need to look after in terms of accessibility to the built environment, transportation, etc. The blind, the deaf, people who can't see, can't walk so well, and speech impediments, etc. Okay, so this is the world map in terms of aging. The darker colors means people are over the age of 65 and above. You can see basically the north and the south in Australia and people Latin America. The people years 65 and above are increasing every year, and more so. You can see by the year 2050, it's going to reach something like 16% or more. That's a projection. Okay, and Europe, you can see the darker red colors are the ones with the people with over 65 years and above. Okay, these are the ones. And then in Asia Pacific, we in the year 2050, we also will have an aging population, no different than anywhere else. And basically, we say older people in our region will be up to 25% of the population. So we have people with disabilities, a huge group. We have the aging population. Aging population, older person, your grandmother, my grandfather will have issues with mobility. They may need a wheelchair. They may need to walk in a walking stick. They may not see so well, vision impairment, if you like. They may not hear so well. So these are the things we're dealing with. People with disabilities and aging population, 2 main populations we need to address. Okay, let's look at accessibility evolution. These are different ways over the years. Barrier-free design, we're now coming down to more universal accessibility, universal design, inclusive design, and even they call it disability inclusive design. These are the progress for the last 30 or 40 years. In universal design, basically, you can see that making the design accessible to everyone in the society, whether you're an older person, you're pushing prams, you're carrying bags, you're in a wheelchair, you're a pregnant lady, you're going out with family. So we need to provide for all these particular groups, and hopefully through the adoption of universal design, we can do this. And there are the 7 principles of universal design. Very quickly, you can once again download all this information in detail. Basically, it says you have to be equal in use. It has to be simple. It has to provide a tolerance for error, low physical effort. In other words, it doesn't need a big, strong man to open the door, to lift something. Can be done by everybody. A weak, older grandmother can open your door for you. And the sizes and space must be appropriate for you, for someone in a wheelchair or a pram to be able to use a lift or get through a doorway, etc. These are 7 principles. You can look at details. And if you have good universal design, at least 40% of the population will benefit. That's a huge amount. 40% will benefit with a good design. Okay, let's look at what the barriers first, before we can say what are the good things. Barriers, I'm sure you will see in everywhere in this country, in Asia Pacific. These I can see without explanation. You see where are the barriers. You can't cross the street well. You know, the streets have a lot of steps, etc. Outdoor barriers, and there are hazards in our streets. It could cause hazards to a number of people, and street crossings are not well defined. Where you can't cross the street if you're in a wheelchair or in a pram. Look at this crossing. You can go across, and there are blocks, there are barriers on the other side. So these are very many issues, and in this forcing this poor man to not walk or travel on the footpath, but he has to travel on the road. Same with the cars, which puts him in a very dangerous situation. That's a terrible situation to be. You can see a very, very poorly designed crossings, etc. And even our footpaths sometimes are blocked with meters that are inaccessible, which makes a footpath inaccessible to many, many people with wheelchairs or pushing a pram, etc. and luggages. And these are examples of poor designs which are not adequate and unsafe. A ramp in a hotel, that's not even a good ramp to take your luggage up. Certainly a wheelchair user won't be able to use that ramp very safely to get up to that particular hotel. And issues are not well done. You can see the ATM machines are designed way too high for anyone to reach, and counters are way too high for people to use. And these are very poor attempts at access provisions. Look at that ramp in front of this Kentucky fried chicken. Look at that ramp. It's very haphazard ramp, which is unsafe for everybody. Why do they need to design something like this when they can design something much better, which I'll show you in a minute? That's a very poor design of a ramp provision, which it's unsafe even for anybody to use. And once again, schools and even departments are designed with very poorly designed ramps without handrails on either sides, etc. Once again, a special school for children are even designed without handrails, are far too steep, they don't have any non-slip features, no handrails, etc. You can see this special school, very, very dangerous. How can you expect children to be walking up and down in a special school using walking frames, etc.? There are no handrails and very, very steep and slippery floor finishes. And once again, floor finishes are terrible in these situations where we certainly would not be welcoming for people pushing prams and wheelchairs, etc. Many, many barriers you can see in this situation. Huge and very poor design. At the end, on the slide on the right, you can see at the bottom of the ramp, there's a step. So why do you put a step at the bottom of a ramp? The ramp is there to eliminate steps, yet it's very poor design. It's a ramp, yet there's a step at the end. And this is a very good example of a poor situation where there are steps, yet there are no what we call contrasting nosing. All these slides show you there are steps. Can you identify where the steps are? You cannot, because the colors are all the same, all blended. Can you imagine a person with low vision, an old person in the dark trying to navigate those steps? It's impossible. So it becomes a hazard to the visually impaired. And telephones, obviously, those telephone booths are inaccessible to someone in a wheelchair. The telephones are installed way too high, and counters are way too high. And so-called accessible toilets, the spaces are so tight and so narrow that someone gets in, they can't really use those spaces well. Very so-called famous opera house in China, built in China in Guangzhou, built by a very famous architect, yet it's totally inaccessible in terms of accessibility. I give it probably a 2 or 1. I would give it a fail. In fact, it does not address any accessible issues. Look at this. This is a staircase. Can you see where the steps are? Steps. Are there handrails? Their so-called handrails are not really usable on both sides. The slide on the right is meant to be a ramp. Can you see the ramps? Are there any handrails? No. Okay, that's a museum. That's a museum or opera house, design. That's terrible, And once again, steps, no handrails, no contrast nosing. Remember this slide, because I'm going to show you a slide where someone has done it really well. This is not a good solution. This is in an opera house, black and white. It's not the way, and no handrail. It's very dangerous for anyone to use. So let's look at some good examples now, very quickly, of good inclusive design environment. Sydney Opera House, very good design in the sense that you can see the integration of steps and ramps, and everybody can use this equally well. It's the integration of design. It's not one for able, one for disabled. Let's use the whole thing, everything together. That's universal design, a design solution for everybody. So everyone can use the ramp as well as staircases. It gives you the choice, selecting one or the other. Look at the pedestrian crossing, beautifully done, right? Easily for everybody, so everybody can use the crossing just like normal. We don't have one set for the disabled and one set for the able. You can see very well defined pedestrian crossings, etc. Good color contrasting, etc. You can see these are very good drop curves and accessible crossings. And once again, this is a very good example of one design for all. You can see slide on the right, the yellow and blue signage gives you the street direction, tells you where the street is. It's also done in what we call the raised letters. Those letters, the words are raised slightly so you could feel it, touch it, and it's also had the braille, the braille letters on the bottom. So person with visual impairment or low vision can get the same information as you and I. That's universal design for everybody. And speed table is the way to adopt this, where we have level crossing from the left to right. It's gives a priority to the people that the wheelchair users of prams can go right across the streets. The ramps are done for the driveway, so the cars have to slow down for people and not the other way around. And these are some very good universal designs in street environment of drinking fountains, handrails, and those contrasting colors to the steps you can see there, right? The left side is those contrasting colors to the nosing, to the staircases. Japan is very good in terms of defining accessible environments. You can see very well defined pedestrian crossing, color, etc. for everybody to be able to use the street easily. Once again, more examples of pedestrian crossings in the world, and even in the streets where there are handrails, that you have braille provided, information provided on the handrails, so people can understand, oh, going down is to a certain situation. That is information on handrails. Crossing, etc., is very, very good. More examples of good crossings, and even urban public toilets can be universal design for every group. Wheelchair users, male, female, it's one design for all. Okay, and this is a good example of where the integration of staircases and a ramp. Okay, this is a very good example in a museum in Canada. And once again, that's a perfect example also in Singapore. You can see stairs and the ramps are very well integrated in the landscape. So the ramps are on the right if you need to take that one, or staircases on the left. So it's a very good example of integration without, you know, making accessibility ugly, etc. Automatic door certainly is a good way to for everybody to use. And once again, the counters can be designed with a section for a high level and a lower section for counters, etc. This is a very good example of a beautiful university design buildings called the Big Eye International Communication Center for people in Japan. It's wonderful in terms of, very quickly, look at contrasting colors, information is there. It's got the tactile information, a signage for us, and signage for the visually impaired. The white maps at the bottom are full of tactile information for someone to use, and even the press buttons for the lift can be done, one set for people standing up and one set lower down on the bottom. The big controls, you can kick it with your hand, with your foot, etc., with your wheelchair in order to call the lift. So fantastic integration of accessibility in this. And once again, very good lifts with different sets of lift buttons, high, low, etc. Gives you the options of using whatever types you like. Corridors are very well defined, and even at the beginning of the room, there is a tactile indicators to show you this is where you put your key, or on the handrail there's information, so people are able to identify their own room very easily. And once again, the maps for toilets, you can see huge maps, color contrasting, and in front of the toilet entrance there are maps to show you the layout of the toilet. So a person who is blind, before they can go in, they can read that information on the tactile map. You can see exactly where the cubicles are, where the basins are. So the person goes in, a blind person can go in and identify where they are. They can come out easily, right? Otherwise, a person goes in, literally, they go into a toilet, they can get lost because they don't know how to find the way back out again. So all this information is very, very cheaply done and easily done for information for everybody. And once again, a good design of a basin unit everybody, wheelchair users, can use. And you can see the tactile information for people who are blind, in order for them to identify where the basins are, right in front of them if they stand on those two yellow tiles. And very simple things like a notches in the table can put your bag in, or you can put your walking stick or your cane in order not to put that on the floor. So very simple designs that can be done and achieved quite easily. So this is an example I want to show you where someone has done a good job. It's still a black and white solution. You can see the color nosing, you can see the steps, where it starts, where it ends, right? The black and white is still there if you want a black and white solution, yet the slide shows you, this particular staircase shows you there are handrails. It can show you can still have the black and white color scheme. You can still make it accessible and safe for everybody to use. So remember this, it can be done nicely, provided the designer knows what he's doing. Even in terms of tourism, in Japan, they made it accessible to this particular castle by installing a lift on the one side. equally accessible for everybody to be able to get into the building to use and enjoy the particular heritage building. And even in football stadiums, they design stadiums where there are accessible seating, where everybody can enjoy the game with the rest of the crowd. So you are not excluded from a football match, etc. It's a accessible stadium for everybody. Inclusive transportation now. Quickly go to transportation. We need to get you from A to B, right? We can have accessible buildings. We need to get you from A to B. That's where transport comes into it. In terms of vehicles, basically, this is a good example out of Japan again, where it's an accessible taxi stand. It's got good covering, so in the rain, you can still wait in the rain. It drops you down from a level down to basically a level of the car. Why is that important, right? You can see there's no steps between where you're waiting and the taxi cab. You open the door, just like here, you open the door and you can get in. You see, there's no steps. You cannot have any steps for the wheelchair user to transfer from where he or she is sitting into the car. That's why the design was like that done in Japan. Very good. Obviously, there are different types of accessible taxi cabs now. There are many, many different solutions. These are sort of the classic London taxis, or the taxis like this are built in America, etc. And with accessible vehicles, you must have accessible parking spaces. That comes hand in hand. Accessible parking spaces you need to provide equally well. And very good information like this, in particular information out of Paris. That's a bus station. It tells you the bus numbers, bus number 24 or 27 with a little wheelchair logo, which means those two lines have accessible buses. Okay, once again, that sign basically tells you more, tells you when the next bus is coming. It says line number 27, which is an accessible bus. The next bus will come in 11 minutes, or the one after that is in 25 minutes. So that's a good piece of information using ICT, information communication and technology, the latest IT or smart city environment to provide information for everybody, not only for the disabled, for all of us to use. And these are the modern versions now of what we can use in a smart city using various aspects of IT, ICT to provide information to us in a smart city environment. Cars, lift, accessible trains in Japan. Once again, many good examples of trains in Japan. The important thing is the doors must be wide enough. Very important thing is the gap between the platform and the vehicle must be minimum and must be level. Once that is not achieved, then it's very difficult for anybody in a wheelchair or pram to get across independently. So the gap is the most important thing. So my friend can actually be independently get into a train situation or train. There must be level access from platform to the train. And once again, even on mainstream trains, this is a design in Norway where the ramp is integrated into the train. Even the lady conductor is able to manipulate and move, take out the ramp so that a person in a wheelchair can get in by themselves and people with luggage can use the same ramp. So once again, ramp is for everybody. Wheelchair users, baby prams, if you like, and luggage can get into the train quite easily, and that just moves up. So that's once again universal design, a design that fits for everybody. And even in cable cars, that goes up in the mountain, it can be made accessible for wheelchair users as well as for baby prams, etc. Once again, ferry transportation. Indonesia, you have many transport. Many islands. You must travel from island to island by ferries or boats, etc. Are your ferries equally accessible for someone in a wheelchair? Look into it, and if not, make it accessible. How do you make it accessible? Airports, we have many airports now. I hope your airport is equally accessible. This Bangkok airport utilize ramps that is good for luggage trolleys as well as for wheelchair users. So once again, one solution for everybody, one solution for many applications. And the design of aircrafts, like this Boeing 87, the Dreamliner, is designed with the universities to make the accessible toilet, right? The latest, the big 380 Airbus has wheelchair accessible toilet. So air travel in terms of road, sea, and air must have accessible facilities. ICT information, very quickly, information available to be installed in the city. So It can be easy for wheelchair users, a blind person, or children to be able to use a pedestrian environment easily by using information and communication system installed in your cities. That's once again probably a smart city concept. This information can be installed in buildings in order to guide a person in wayfinding in a building. Even ATM machines are very well designed. These are very good designs, accessible ATM machines. This particular machine can be usable by different people. You see the different cards on the right-hand side. You can, apart from the ATM machine, it's accessible to wheelchair users. You could apply for a card that's a very basic card, or you can provide for a card which is become a picture form, provides a picture, on the visual screen. It can provide the information through sign language. It can provide the screen in high contrast, black and white, red and blue, etc. And you can provide voice guidance. If you have the card, you can apply for a card that provides voice guidance. You insert that card and use the handset to help you to navigate to do your transaction. That's a voice guidance. So this information, this equipment's already out there. Okay, let's utilize this to make our places more accessible. And once again, even simple telephone systems in certain airports are fully accessible, in terms of the blind, deaf, etc. And this is a pen, which my friend designed, the U-wing pen. You can see the different applications of a pen or pencil. We have traditional pen and pencil, which certain people cannot use. Look at the pen that he has devised. You can use for many, many different applications, even use your toes to write with. And depending on hand functions, you don't need to use the pen and pencil. It's been out there for the last 200 years. Okay. And once again, he designed this particular pen also for people to use, able to use. Very quickly, and in terms of inclusive tourism, basically, it's tourism for all. It must be accessible for all people with and without disability, and must cater for the needs of full range of consumers. People need to look at people with disabilities, seniors and older people, and families with young children. That's why we need universal tourism and inclusive tourism. And few things we need to consider: accessible hardware. We mentioned already infrastructure, air, sea, and land, accessible built environment, transportation, ICT. Already had shown examples before. In terms of inclusive software in those places, the services must be made to be inclusive. You must have certain policies. Your policy maybe to say, your access on buses must be accessible to 20% of those facilities. Okay, that's a policy you can adopt. Procedures, you must have procedures in order to say what happens when I get to an airport, what procedures you have to help me to get from check-in right to the airplane. And you must have the complementary services to provide that service for me. Obviously, it has to do a lot of staff training. In order to do that, not only training for the staff, but also training for the travel agencies and tour operators. And so here is the motto again: accessible inclusive tourism must leave no one behind. So for someone who's not going to be waiting at the bottom because they can't get to the place, we must provide accessible in order for everybody to enjoy everything. Disneyland, very smart in designing their places to be accessible. They know people come with families, people, older person will come in their wheelchairs, etc. And they have actually catered for various people, including our special needs groups. And you see, once you make it accessible, everybody can go out. Everybody can get out and enjoy the environment. Don't get concerned because they're in wheelchair, they can't do many things. They can do many, many things, provided we provide the facilities for them to do that. And all the accessible tourism has basically developed very early on in the year 2003, when the UN basically had a number of seminars. I was very much involved in his very first conference held by the UN SCAP in Hanoi, talk about accessible tourism then. Okay, and we're now to the latest one is the year 2016, where the World Tourism Organization, WTO, the World Tourism Organization, is addressing this issue, and we even have a World Tourism Day, which says tourism for all, We need to promote universal accessibility. Okay, so in the world, we have different networks on accessible tourism. ENET is a European network on accessible tourism that have been going for almost 20 years. So download their information and see what they're all about. We in Asia Pacific, 5 years ago, we decided we will also start up an Asia Pacific network on accessible tourism. They are now well established. They are now based in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, out of which I'm one of the advisors to the network. So let's work together to make our Asia Pacific more accessible for everybody. And even some countries are actually promoting themselves with accessible tourism. In Japan, your Bali is meant to be one of the accessible tourism spots. You let me know whether it's fully accessible. I've been there recently, but Thailand certainly is promoting that as an accessible city, as well as in Spain. So Thailand was promoting that. We in 2019, they invited my delegation, about 10 of us went over, wheelchair users, older persons. We visited Thailand. They said, let's come to my country, Thailand, Bangkok, etc. You give us an assessment and how accessible Thailand is. And so we went there for 5 days and we came back with reviews and how well they were developing their accessible tourism. We gave them good feedback. So let's start exchanging our tour groups. We can come to Bali, we can come to Indonesia or Denpasar, wherever, etc., to test your accessible tourism. You, in fact, in turn, can come to Hong Kong, can come to Bangkok, Malaysia, Singapore, etc. Let's exchange information to make our tourist spots more accessible. Safe environment, very important.
So sorry, Dr. Kwan.
Okay, finishing up. Okay.
Yes, so sorry, terribly
safe
sorry.
Environment. I'll finish up on this one. We need to be safe for everybody. So you need to consider all this sort of thing. So I think I should conclude on this one. I will end my slideshow. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm so sorry because of the limited time. I do believe that all of us really want to know more about the accessibility and also universal design for everybody, because it's totally important for us in Indonesia, especially because actually we are prone to accident. We have so many people as our population. In fact, maybe we have a little bit of time to answer the question in the chat, if you don't mind, Dr. Kwan.
Okay, we can have a few minutes for questions.
Yes.
Sure.
The question is about how about the design of accessible public buildings in terms of disaster mitigation. As we know, a month ago, a stampede incident happened in a football stadium in Indonesia. Actually, it's also in our city. What do you think about this, Dr. Kwan? This is from Bu Unita. Thank you for your question.
I think there are certain things for those situations. We also had if you've got stampede, happening in recently in Korea, right? Many people die in the crush in Korea.
Yeah.
You also had a stampede in the stadium. We also had a same situation in Hong Kong over Christmas, New Year's Eve. Certain things, two things we have to consider. I think in this situation, we can design something which is safe. Equally important, we must have good crowd control. Crowd control, which is not to do with hardware. It has to do with software. That's crowd management, dispersal management. Just like in any stadium, after a big match in a football stadium, you must have the operational people, the management people to manage people to leave the place safely and effectively and in an orderly manner. Otherwise, you can have crushes, whether it's the football matches, whether it's New Year's Eve, anywhere, it's going to happen. So management control software must equally important as the design. So in design, is it possible? I think we can design all we like, but if people don't respect the design, people still get crushed in, squeezed into a tight spaces, fatalities will happen. Okay, so work together. Software and hardware must work together.
Yeah, wonderful. I think that's a very good answer, Dr. Kwan. Yeah, we have to also remember about how to control the people, not only about designing universal design and to save for everybody, but if we don't control the people, it's also going to be hazardous. Thank you very much for your answer, Dr. Kwan, and also thank you very much for your material. And Now we will move on to the next speaker for this plenary session. I would like to thank you again for Dr. Kwan, and so sorry about the time that is very limited. And if you may stay, you are feel free to stay for the question and answer session in the last session. And see you next time. Dr. Kwan, thank you for your previous explanation by you. And now we would like to say hello to Dan Stapp. Hello, Dan. It's Zia here.
Hello, Zia. Hello, Zia.
Yeah, I believe this is the second time we've met. We've met before previously in the IDRAN, what is that event? Yeah, in the conference of IDRAN. How are you, Dan?
I'm very well, thank you, Zia. It's so good. I'm sorry not to be there in person, but it's so good to be talking to you again and talking to people in Indonesia too. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And before we listen to what Dan's going to deliver, I would like to introduce Dan Stubbs to all of you in this occasion. So Daniel Stubbs is working in Victorian Disability Workers Commissioner in Australia. Daniel Stubb is the Commissioner of Victorian Disability Worker in Australia. He has extensive experiences in the areas of human rights, international law, and application. He will share his initiative related to promoting inclusive workplace for disability. So are you ready, Dan, to deliver your material right now? Okay, I will help you with the material. I will share the screen right now.
Great.
So
thank you, Zia, and thank you everybody. I assume I'm on screen now. So I'm going to give a particular presentation which is about using the rights-based approach for inclusion, and I used this tool in a previous presentation for Zia, so she will be some of your colleagues will be familiar with this, but I think it's a good tool and a good way to give examples. But first of all, just some background about me. Next slide, just about me. So I'm a person with a disability. I'm blind, and I was fortunate enough to go to school in Australia. I lost my sight when I was 15, when I was in high school. And I think probably my greatest worry was whether I would be able to continue my education when I was 15 and whether I would have to go into a special school. But at that time in Australia, they were introducing what they called integrated education, where I was able to stay in my same school and be supported to continue learning as a student with disability in my school. Fortunately, this is reasonably common now in Australia, but then it was a new idea. Even people I know of my age, sometimes many went to a special school for people with disabilities. I also went to university and did some degrees in economics and later in law, and was fortunate because we, again, have a number of programs to support people with disabilities like me in accessing education. Like when I was first at university, I had volunteers reading all my textbooks to me on audio tape. And then some years later, when I went back to university, I did other things where I was able to get all the textbooks in electronic format on my computer. Hopefully many of you have experienced that, but it's if you haven't and you're blind or vision impaired, it's so important to get that access to that information. So I've held a number of roles. Probably the important one that I want to share with you is I've worked overseas in developing countries, mainly in Pacific Island countries and in Papua New Guinea, doing work in disability and development. Sometimes I was working for UN agencies, and sometimes I was working for other development agencies or local organisations to assist with disabled people's organisations and to assist with analysis of disability inclusion, which I'll come back to. I've been an advocate in Australia of rights and freedoms for a range of disadvantaged groups. I've done a lot of work over many years, sometimes on a voluntary basis and sometimes paid, with disabled people's organisations. You might hear me refer to those as DPOs, and they're organisations of people with disabilities that advocate for the rights and inclusion of people with disability. Now I have this role which is called the Commissioner of Disability Workers. And you can see on my slides, there's a picture of me there at the bottom in case you can't see me now. Next slide. A little bit about my role as the Commissioner of Disability Workers. So in Australia, we have many disability services where people are paid to assist people with disabilities in relation to their needs and barriers that are created from their disability. And my role is to regulate those workers to ensure that they do a good job and they don't harm people with disabilities, and they provide quality services. We receive complaints about disability workers from anybody in the community can complain, particularly people with disabilities themselves can lodge a complaint. We receive notifications from disability workers about other disability workers if they're putting people at risk of harm. And we have a registration scheme where people with disabilities, workers who support people with disabilities can register to show that they're a high quality worker and meet certain standards. There are a range of legal actions I can take against disability support workers. The one main example is that I can prohibit or ban someone from working in the sector ever again. So that's if I find that someone has harmed a person with disability when working with them, and that is a deliberate harm. And unfortunately, we see that quite a bit. Okay, next slide. Achieving true inclusion. So I just want to, many of you will be aware of the different models of disability and how that's kind of developed over many years. I'm just going to very briefly refer to those models by way of background. We've had the charity model of disability, and the charity model is essentially that we help people with disability because we feel sorry for them. So maybe charity organizations get donations and people want to help people with disabilities, and they don't ask people with disabilities what they want. They just do things for them because they think that they're sad and unfortunate. The medical model is really a way of looking at disability as someone has something missing. So not looking at their strengths or their capabilities, but more what they can't do or what they have missing, like myself. My sight is missing, or someone has a physical disability, the thing they can't do, they can't walk or cannot use their hands, or maybe people with intellectual disability can't think as quickly. So, and often in the medical model, they talk about how they can cure people with disabilities and not how they can include people with disabilities. Because of course, many disabilities are not curable. Now, the social model of disability brings us a long way forward to see people with disabilities not seen as the problem themselves, but society creating the barrier to inclusion. The most common one is where we see maybe flight of stairs and someone with a disability is unable to get up those stairs because they're using a wheelchair. And instead of seeing the problem with the person because they can't walk, we see the problem as we shouldn't have created stairs there. We should have made a ramp or a lift or done something different to make it easier. And for me, it's a bit like if someone gives me a piece of paper with writing on it, it's not my blindness that's the problem here. It's actually the problem with the format that I've been given. Then we come to what I call what's known as the rights-based approach. And I see this as taking us one step further than the social model of disability. So not just seeing society creating the barrier, but actually seeing that people with disability have the right to expect that barrier is removed and inclusion is actually actively done for those people with disabilities. So we see that society and those who have the duty to deliver those rights actually do that. I'm going to talk about the rights-based approach in terms of a tool that you can use as a way to seek changes to government policy or to maybe an employment setting or government laws, to seek changes to laws, to seek changes to services, or even to seek changes and inclusion in your local school or mosque or anything like that. It's a very useful way of thinking about how we create sustainable change for inclusion. And inclusion in workplace, of course, is something I'm very passionate about, but it's not the only way we can use this tool. So next slide. So the rights-based approach is set out here with really 6 different steps or 6 different elements. So we have participation, and I'm going to expand on all of these. I'm going to give detail to all of these now. So, but I'm just going to set them out. And if you see those of you who speak English, you can see down the side there that the way to remember these 6 elements is the word panels, and that'll help you in future to remember all the elements of this rights-based approach. So in the rights-based approach, I'm going to talk to you about participation of people with disabilities, accountability, and really it's important to remember that those with the duty to give us our rights is government. Government are the duty holders or the duty bearers to deliver our human rights to us as people with disability. So, and I'll expand more on that. Non-discrimination and equality, and that's obvious, but I'll expand on that because there's a couple of different ways of thinking about that. Empowerment of people with disabilities, and of course laws or legal frameworks. We need to have laws to back up all these things that we're talking about. And sustainability, how do we make sure that we maintain the rights, not just for a short period, but this stays. Okay, so the next slide, participation of people with disabilities. So when we're talking about a change process to promote inclusion, that change process needs to, the whole process needs to include the participation of people with disabilities from the beginning. Some of the ways we do this with government and all sorts of bodies is government have, many governments, including yours, have consultative mechanisms. They convene committees or councils of people with disabilities to advise them on what the best things are to do. And many governments around the world do this, and it's a very powerful way for governments to understand what's required, because governments often don't know. We need to make sure that they talk to people with disabilities. Able-bodied people often don't know what's going to be best for people with disabilities. When they do just assume, often it's going to be wrong. So we need to make sure that people with disabilities are participating in the change for inclusion from the first moment. When I think of a workplace, if an employer makes assumptions about what can help me in my job, and they print all the material as in Braille, I'm not a very, I'll admit to you, I'm not a very good Braille reader. I prefer to read things with my computer where it reads it out to me using a voice, which some of you might know, and that's a lot easier way for me to read. And so Braille would take me a lot longer and I would find it a lot harder. They need to consult with me. I need to participate in the process. And I remind you that governments and employers have a duty to provide for our human rights. Another way to promote participation is for people with disabilities to collect together as disabled people's organisations to advocate together. It's very hard to advocate on your own. It's so important to come together and advocate as a group of people with disabilities for change in workplaces and how people can be included in different roles. And so advocacy is such a profoundly important thing. I think the other aspect, and I'll come back to this, visibility of people with disabilities in all areas of society is very, very important. If we don't see people with disabilities in society, employers and lawmakers will assume that there are no people with disabilities. Now, we know that there are people with disabilities everywhere, but there will be assumptions that we don't need to make any changes to our jobs or workplaces because there are no people with disabilities. We need to make sure that people with disabilities are visible and part of any change process. Next slide. Accountability. Like I said, government are the duty bearers, and we as people and people with disabilities are the rights bearers. We own all of our human rights, including the rights to not be discriminated against and to receive our basic human rights as people with disabilities, the right to be safe, to get an education, to get a job. There are different mechanisms by which we can hold government to account, such as using human rights mechanisms. Many countries have human rights commissions where you can lodge complaints. Many countries will have disability plans where they develop a plan for providing for inclusion for people with disabilities. And the ultimate inclusion mechanism is through government spending. Now, many of you will have, if you've ever tried to advocate for change, governments and employers generally will say, oh, we don't have enough money for that. It's not true. Governments make decisions and they decide on their priorities. They make all sorts of decisions about what to spend on, and they will prioritise based on social pressure. And they spend an enormous amount of money on things to help out corporations and military spending and different other forms of spending. And so ensuring disability is recognised in your government budget is possible for no matter what sort of economy you're in. It's appropriate and normal. And also, when government is spending money for the first time on building something new, whether it be a school, a building, a road, that money can be spent wisely if it's spent from the beginning to include people with disabilities. And if there are accessibility measures taken into account from the beginning, many of you will know that it will be a better, more sustainable building that will be better for everybody to access that building. So when government says we can't afford it, you need to think about the fact that they're not prioritising people with disabilities, they're prioritising others. And I think on that slide there is a picture of our Australian Parliament House, where I have advocated for that kind of change on many occasions. And even as the Australian government with great wealth will often say we can't afford it. And I've often said, well, that's because you're prioritising other things, not people with disabilities. Non-discrimination and equality. We want people with disabilities to be able to participate in all aspects of life, including work. That could mean school, so participation in mainstream school if possible, but to make sure people with disability gain access to education, but also just general community activity such as sport or religious worship, family, friends, and transport. I've heard some of your speakers today talk extensively about accessible transport. All these things are where you want to see inclusion and non-discrimination. For example, in the realm of work, it's crucial that people with disabilities receive equal treatment. Now, what that really means is that you're treated the same as any non-disabled person in getting that job. And one of the ways we need to think about this when seeking a job is that your disability does not preclude you, and my disability in my case does not preclude me from doing this job. So, for example, if I'm wanting to apply for a job as a truck driver, I'm of course not going to get that job because I can't drive, I can't see. So similarly, if someone with a physical disability using a wheelchair, if they were going to be someone working in a warehouse or a supermarket and their job is to put things on high shelves, then maybe they couldn't get that job because that's an essential element of that role. But for me, as someone who is a lawyer or an advocate or someone who works in an office, because of technology, I can fulfill all the essential parts of that role. There are some non-essential parts of the role that I can't fulfill, such as sometimes for my job I need to travel and I can't drive a car. So my employer allows me to catch a taxi or a train or other forms of transport to get to other places where I need to be, which is normal. It's not essential that I drive to move around to other places. It's essential I can read and speak to people and understand laws and policy. So reasonable adjustment is what we call for employers to make. Now, reasonable is often easy to interpret. For government, we can expect, if the government is the employer, we can expect them to do a lot more to pay for things like accessible rooms and ramps and accessible bathrooms and different kinds of computer software and things like that. And maybe for a small business, it's reasonable to ask less of them. But we have a concept in many discrimination acts around the world where we can ask for some reasonable accommodation to assist someone to keep a job. And really, what I think this comes down to is the attitude of employers. And that's one of the key things we need to change in many ways, changing that attitude that people with disabilities can do a job if it's recognised that they can undertake the essential elements of that role. The other aspect of non-discrimination is we need to think about equality amongst people with disabilities or amongst the disability community. A key element of the rights-based approach is to make sure that we are including the most disadvantaged members of the disability community. So often we might include people with disabilities, but we might forget women and girls with disabilities, and we might not include them. We need to include everyone. Sometimes we might include people with disabilities, but not include certain cultural groups, or different religious groups. We also need to remember that all disabilities must be included. And often we see maybe only blind people being included or only people with physical disabilities. But it's also important for us to remember that we're fighting for the rights of inclusion of all disability, including people with intellectual disability, people with mental illness. These are hard, but it's important. Sometimes we see greater disadvantage experienced by people who live in rural and remote areas away from cities. And again, we need to work harder to make sure we include those groups of people. We should leave no one behind, because if we include some, then the disadvantage for those more marginalised groups will increase further, and they will be further discriminated against. Next slide on empowerment. This is about decision makers, and whether it be government or employers or anyone sharing power with people with disabilities. But on a day-to-day basis, it relates to, in many ways, in the empowerment of people with disabilities, where there's often disempowerment of people with disabilities. Often we as people with disabilities do not have choice and control about ourselves and our bodies and our future. So to enable people with disabilities to make decisions about their own future and their own education and what job they want to do, just like anyone else can, giving people with disabilities that empowerment is so important. But it involves some risk taking, and everyone takes risks. And it's an important part of our social development. So even though many parents of children and adults with disabilities, parents don't want us to take risks, but we need to take risks as people with disabilities, and we need to fail to understand and become more empowered next time about what failure is and what success is. I think disempowerment also can result in isolation of people with disabilities, and therefore people with disabilities sometimes can have very few friends and very few connections to society, which makes them much more vulnerable and less able to participate and less able to gain employment and education opportunities. Another thing is, when we involve people with disabilities, we need to make sure that people with disabilities have the ability to complain about what's happening to them. If I don't feel I can complain, then I'm quite disempowered, because I feel I have to go along with the decisions being made about me and I have no power. And another way to look at it is to have a seat at the table or to negotiate. So people with disabilities get the opportunity to negotiate in decisions about them. Laws to back up all of these things I'm talking about are crucial, of course. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a lawyer, but I think it's important to be able to point to laws and to use the justice system. Many countries will have anti-discrimination laws that can be used to fight discrimination, like I've talked about. Some countries have inclusion laws, which say things like, people with disabilities must be employed as a certain percentage of the workforce in any large employer, including government, and other inclusion laws might be about the requirement to make schools and transport and hospitals and government buildings accessible. Of course, there are a number of UN conventions that can back up the rights-based approach, such as the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, which I'm sure you all know about. Another one I like to refer to is the Convention on the Rights of the Child. That convention is the only other convention, I believe, that mentions the rights of people or children with disabilities. And I think it's very important, because I think one of the most important things we can do for our future is increase the participation of children with disabilities in school. I'll come back to that. It's also important that we have access to the justice system so we can take a complaint again about discrimination to the court. And finally, sustainability. It's all very well to have all these fights and to be able to get a job or make change so that people with disabilities can have jobs, but we need to sustain the change. And I think some of the ways, in my experience of doing that, is to make sure that there is community support for the change, so that not just people with disabilities are seeing the importance of inclusion, but all people without disabilities. And for that, you need to gradually change the attitude to people with disability. And I think that's largely done by increased visibility and awareness. So the more that society sees us in the street, whether it's me with my white cane or people in wheelchairs or other disabilities, the easier it will become for people to see it as normal that we include people with disabilities. And I think the most important first place to do that is in schools. We need to make sure that children with disabilities are in schools, and it's good teachers will have good attitude to how they can do this. I've seen some of the best examples of inclusion, not based on equipment or training or ramps, but just because of teachers who are dedicated to making sure that all children are represented in their classroom. We need to have good leadership, and that's at the political level, in religious organisations, and in community organisations and community leadership generally. People in leadership roles, we need them to be talking about people with disabilities and the importance to include. I'm going to leave it there. I've covered a lot of topics. I hope it's made sense. I'm glad you've got my slides, because they provide you a good framework. And the final slide there is the rights-based approach repeated. I've got a bit over time. I was going to give an example to help you understand, but I don't know if I've got much more time. Have I, Zia? Do I have 1 or 2 more minutes to give an example?
Yes, sure.
Zia, good, okay. All right, now I'm going to give an example of the rights-based approach. And Zia, I'll just get you to keep that last slide up of the panel's rights-based approach. And Zia, I'm going to use you as an example. I hope you don't mind. But
okay,
you know
I don't
me.
mind.
I won't be mean. So for this presentation, I needed some help. So I asked Zia, because I have trouble working with the slides, and I needed someone to change the slides and operate the slides for me, which she's done for me today. And so really, I want to ask, do we think that we use the rights-based approach here? So in this case, I needed some help, and I think we had a good rights-based approach, because in the decision to decide what type of help I wanted, the person with disability, which is me, was participating in the process. In fact, I was the one driving it. I asked Zia to do this for me, and she said yes. So we had participation of the service, participation of the decision by the person with disability in me. Do we have accountability? So the service provider, Zia, was accountable, I think, because, well, all of you got to see if she put the right slide up when I was talking. And if she didn't, then maybe you would tell her, or she would get some feedback after the session. So we have accountability because we might complain to her if she uses the wrong slide. Did you use the right slides, Zia?
Yes.
I think so. So we had non-discrimination. I think we had non-discrimination and equality, but we'll never know. Zia, if you know, maybe if I was from a different race and I was a woman and maybe I had a different disability, would you still have said yes to help me?
Of course.
Okay, good. All right. So we have non-discrimination and equality. So it doesn't matter what my disability is or my cultural background. Do we have empowerment? I think I was empowered because I was the one telling Zia what to do, and she did it. I believe she did it.
Yes.
So I think I was empowered to do this.
Yes.
The
totally.
legal bit, the legal part, I'm not so sure of because I'm not a lawyer in Indonesia. I know there are some laws that can help me if I feel like Zia, if Zia had said no, maybe I think I could have taken legal action against her.
You can sue me.
Of course, I would never do that. That's right. I would never take legal action against Zia. And is it a sustainable service? Is it okay that is it possible to always easily get this service? So that's the final one, the S. Is it sustainable?
Yes, I can ensure that maybe.
Yeah. And there'll always be, if it's not Zia, maybe there'll be someone else, but maybe not, because maybe the most sustainable thing would be if I had a more accessible slide system that I could use on my own computer, and then that would give me the most empowerment and the most sustainable. So that's possibly a question, but I'm always confident that I could always ask Zia whenever I'm giving a speech in Indonesia. I can always call on Zia because she's very reliable and empowering.
Of
so
course,
that's a little small. That's a little small example for everybody to understand. And really, some of you will think some of those things are quite hard, and you don't have to start at the beginning if you're seeking to create greater inclusion. You can do some of those elements in a different order to create that rights-based approach. I'm going to leave it there, and thank you, Zia. I don't think we probably don't have time for questions, so I think I've taken up your break time.
Okay, wonderful presentation from Dan, as always, I think. And you also make a very clear example involving me, myself. So that's very interesting. Thank you very much for your presentation, Dan. And I believe that what you already said, it's actually also encompasses the theme of our conference today, because it is actually about how people can stand up for their rights and how we can provide and help to provide the rights in terms of in all of field, in education, in law, and also environment, and also the universal design, and so on and so forth. So many things that we can do, and we can try to empower people with disability. Thank you very much for your material. That's very, very good and enlightening for all of us. And I think because we already have a very limited time, and now it's also Friday in Indonesia, and after this, some of us will have Friday prayers. So we still have like maybe around 20 minutes to move on to our parallel sessions. So thank you again for Dan staff and also Dr. Joseph Kwan for your material today in this morning, and also Prof. Tiffany Wild earlier.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kwan. And also for the participants, I invite you to join another link, another Zoom link that already been shared in the chat. So you can join the parallel session 1 and 2 through this link. I will share the link one more time. And if you are not able to join the parallel session 1, you are welcome to join the second parallel session in the afternoon. Thank you very much. Dr. Kwan, I'm very grateful to have you here. Hopefully we will have another meeting, another occasion to talk about the universal design and also about the tagline, leave no one behind. Thank you and have a nice day.
Thank you very much. And have a nice rest of the conference. Congratulations. And really, it's a good thing that you're doing this. And I think you should do more of this for Indonesia. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me and all the best. Bye-bye now.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Okay, silahkan. Please. Ladies and gentlemen, we will close this Zoom session and now we can join the next session through the link in the chat box for parallel session 1 and 2. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you very much. And also you can go back to this session later in the plenary session 2 in around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. See you. Oh yeah, parallel session at 2 in the afternoon. Okay, see you. Thank you very much for the language interpreter and for the sign language interpreter. Today we have Arum and Fikri, and for interpreter we have Amalia Wardani. Thank you very much and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.